Julian Vance's life was a testament to the American dream, a perfectly curated masterpiece of success, stability, and quiet contentment. From the outside, he was the man who had it all. At 38, he was a partner at Vance and Associates, a prestigious architectural firm his grandfather had founded and his father had built into an empire. His designs, sleek, modern, and environmentally conscious, were coveted by tech moguls and old money families alike. He lived in a stunning, minimalist home in the leafy suburbs of Seattle, a structure he had designed himself, with walls of glass that looked out onto a manicured garden and the serene waters of Lake Washington. His family was equally perfect. His wife, Emily, was a brilliant art historian with a quick wit and a kindness that could soothe any storm. They had 2 children, a 12-year-old son, Leo, whose passion for coding rivaled his father's for design, and an 8-year-old daughter, Clara, a whirlwind of boundless energy and infectious laughter. Their life was a series of sun-drenched moments, family dinners on the patio as the sun set, weekend hikes in the Cascades, and quiet evenings curled up with a book and a glass of wine. It was a life built on solid foundations, an inheritance, not just of wealth, but of honor and a spotless family name. The Vances were pillars of the community, known for their integrity, their philanthropy, and their unwavering moral compass, but beneath this flawless surface, a subtle, persistent unease had begun to ripple. It was a feeling Julian couldn't quite place, a ghostly coldness that would sometimes descend in the middle of a warm, loving moment. It felt like a small, discordant note in an otherwise perfect symphony. He had started having a recurring nightmare, a dark, claustrophobic dream he couldn't fully remember upon waking, only a sense of profound dread and the image of a heavy, locked door. The dream would leave him shaken, his heart pounding, a cold sweat dampening his sheets. He would hold Emily close, his rational mind dismissing it as stress from a demanding project, but a part of him knew it was something deeper, something older. The family's summer home in the San Juan Islands was the primary source of his anxieties. A grand Victorian-era house, it had been passed down through generations. While his children loved its rambling halls and the scent of salt and pine, Julian felt a different energy there, a palpable weight of history, a silence that felt less like peace and more like a held breath. There was a small, dusty attic room at the back of the house that had been locked for as long as he could remember. His father had always said it was full of old, unimportant papers and that the lock was rusted shut. A small, unexplainable fear prevented Julian from ever trying to open it. Now, with his grandmother Eleanor's passing, the key to the family's past seemed to be in his hands. Eleanor was the last Vance who remembered the old stories, the one who held the keys to the family's history, both the celebrated and the forgotten. Julian had been close to her, but in her final years, her mind had grown cloudy, her stories fragmented and strange. She would often murmur about a promise to the ocean and the blood on the ledger, phrases Julian had dismissed as the ramblings of an old woman. But after her funeral, as Julian, Emily, and the children sorted through her belongings, those words echoed in his mind, taking on a new, unsettling resonance. The inciting incident arrived not with a bang, but with a quiet, unassuming whimper. In the corner of Eleanor's study, beneath a stack of brittle photo albums and yellowed newspapers, Julian found a small, unmarked wooden box. It was no bigger than a showbox, carved from dark, polished mahogany, its surface etched with intricate, swirling patterns that reminded him of ocean waves. There was no keyhole. Instead, a complex, almost invisible latch was built into the carvings. He felt a jolt of recognition, a primal memory stirring. This was the door from his dreams. He was instantly captivated and repelled by it. He took the box home, hiding it in his study as if it were a forbidden object. For days, he tried to open it, his architectural mind intrigued by the puzzle of the latch. He ran his fingers over the carvings, tracing the patterns, feeling for the hidden mechanism. Emily, noticing his distraction, asked what he was working on. He simply said it was an old family puzzle, an heirloom. He didn't want to admit the fear, the inexplicable pull it had on him. Finally, Late one night, after everyone else was asleep, he found the trick. A small, almost imperceptible pressure on a specific part of the carving caused a tiny click. He pressed down, and the lid of the box popped open. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, was not a fortune in jewels or gold. It was a single, leather-bound journal, its pages thick and brittle with age, and a tarnished silver locket with a faded photograph inside. But what really caught his eye, what sent a shiver of ice down his spine, was the first line of the journal, written in a spidery, elegant hand that he instantly recognized as his great-great-grandfather's. The words were a confession, a horrifying truth that Julian had never considered possible, a secret that had been buried for a century, waiting to be found. And as he read the first few sentences, he felt his perfect life, the very foundation of his existence, begin to crack. He read on, his mind reeling. The words painted a picture of a man he didn't know, a founder of the Vance legacy whose success was built not on hard work and integrity, but on a betrayal so profound it echoed through time. The perfect life Julian had lived was not a result of his own merit, but the lingering aftermath of a dark secret. He felt a sense of crushing vertigo, as if the ground beneath him had opened up. The words on the page were a poison, seeping into his reality, twisting everything he believed to be true. His father's reputation, his own success, even the loving home he had built, all of it now felt tainted. A beautiful thought hiding a monstrous truth. Julian closed the journal, his hands trembling. He looked around his pristine study, at the awards on the wall, the photos of his smiling family, and it all felt like a lie. The nightmare from his dreams suddenly made sense. The locked door was a metaphor for this very secret, a part of his family's history that had been willfully hidden. The unease that had haunted him for months wasn't a premonition of future danger, but the faint, distant echo of a past crime. He had a choice to make: close the box and bury the secret once more, or face the devastating truth. But as he stared at the journal, he knew he had already made his choice the moment he opened the box. The illusion of his perfect life was shattered, and the downfall had just begun. The words on the page were an acid, burning their way into Julian's mind, corroding every memory, every belief, every proud thought he had ever held about his family. His great-great-grandfather, Nathaniel Vance, a man whose portrait hung proudly in the firm's main lobby and whose name was synonymous with civic progress in Seattle, was a thief and a murderer. The confession was a cold, brutal account of a calculated betrayal. Nathaniel had not founded Vance and Associates through foresight and hard work, but by cunningly engineering the downfall of his business partner, a man named Elias Thorne, a successful shipping magnate who had made his fortune on the bustling Seattle waterfront, had trusted Nathaniel implicitly. They had planned to build the city's first modern shipping port together, a project that would have solidified both their legacies. But Thorne had a secret asset, a vast, undeveloped tract of land on the San Juan Islands, the very land where the Vance family's summer home now stood. Nathaniel, consumed by greed and ambition, had seen an opportunity. The journal described in chilling detail how Nathaniel had forged documents, manipulated ledgers, and spread rumors that ruined Thorne's reputation and credit. The betrayal culminated in a final, horrifying act. Thorne, facing financial ruin and public disgrace, had confronted Nathaniel at the San Juan property. In the journal, Nathaniel admitted to a physical altercation, a struggle that ended with Thorne falling from a cliff and into the churning waters below. The ocean took him, the spidery script read, and with him, my sin was buried. Nathaniel had then used his now undisputed claim to the land and Thorne's stolen assets to lay the foundation of the Vance empire, the very home Julian cherished. The summer retreat that held so many happy memories was built on a grave. Julian's hands were shaking so violently he had to put the journal down. He felt a profound physical sickness, as if a poison had been injected into his veins. The air in his study, usually a source of comfort and inspiration, now felt thick and suffocating. He stared at the awards on his wall, the framed photos of his family, the beautiful architecture of his home, and saw only a monstrous edifice built on a century-old crime. The unease, the nightmares, his grandmother's fragmented whispers, they all coalesced into a single, terrifying truth. Eleanor hadn't been rambling. She was trying to confess a family sin she could no longer bear to hold. The blood on the ledger wasn't a metaphor. It was the stolen fortune. A promise to the ocean was a final prayer for the man who was swallowed by its waves. He thought of his father, a man Julian had always idolized for his unwavering integrity and strength of character. Had he known? Julian felt a new wave of betrayal. He remembered his father's fierce protection of the locked attic room, his dismissal of Eleanor's words, his insistence that the family legacy was one of pure, hard-earned success. Was it possible? His father had been a keeper of this dark secret, a silent partner in the cover-up. The thought was unbearable. The very pillars of his life, his family, his work, his sense of self were crumbling. He couldn't sleep. He couldn't eat. The next few days were a blur of numb existence. He pretended to be sick, calling into the office, his mind too consumed by the journal to focus on blueprints or client meetings. Emily, ever perceptive, grew concerned. "Julian, you've been so distant," she said one evening, placing a hand on his forehead. "Are you feeling okay? Is it a work thing?" He couldn't tell her. The truth was too grotesque, too dangerous. How could he explain that their beautiful life was a lie, that their children were playing in a home built on murder? It would destroy her, destroy their family. He chose silence, a decision that created a new painful distance between them. The first crack in his present life appeared as a single, innocuous-looking envelope. It was a legal notice from a small, local law firm, requesting a meeting to discuss a long-forgotten property claim related to the San Juan Islands. The letter mentioned the name Elias Thorne. Julian's heart seized. He hadn't told anyone about the journal, yet the past was already reaching out, its long, bony fingers closing in. Driven by a desperate need for answers, he began his own investigation. He couldn't just accept the word of a century-old confession. There had to be another side to the story, a detail Nathaniel had omitted. He started with online historical archives, poring over old Seattle newspapers from the late 1800s. He found articles celebrating the rise of the Vance and Associates, and a small, almost forgotten obituary for Elias Thorne listed as lost at sea. There were no public records of a dispute or a struggle. It was a perfectly executed cover-up. The historical record was Nathaniel's masterpiece of deceit, a public narrative carefully constructed to erase the truth. He found himself drawn back to the San Juan Islands house. It was late autumn now, the air crisp and cold, the trees shedding their leaves. The house felt different, sinister. He finally worked up the courage to go into the locked attic room. The old key from Eleanor's box fit perfectly. Inside, the room was a mausoleum of forgotten memories, filled with old trunks, dusty furniture, and boxes of papers. He found another journal, this one his grandfather's, and a box of his father's private letters. The journals, however, were not confessions. They were filled with cryptic references, hushed warnings, and a palpable sense of fear about the debt owed to the sea. As he dug deeper, he found it a tattered, yellowed ledger hidden in the false bottom of an old sea chest. It was the original ledger from Nathaniel's company. Tucked inside the pages was a crumpled, blood-stained receipt, detailing a final, large payment to Elias Thorne's estate. The signature on the receipt wasn't Thorne's. It was a forged document. The date of the forged receipt was the day after Thorne was lost at sea. The discovery was a gut punch. It wasn't just a crime committed by a distant ancestor. It was a legacy of lies passed down through generations. His grandfather and father had not been innocent bystanders. They had been active participants in the cover-up. They were all complicit, bound by the secret, and now so was Julian. The devastating realization hit him like a physical blow. The weight of the past was no longer a ghost. It was a physical burden, and it was crushing him. He knew, with a certainty that chilled him to his core, that he couldn't simply walk away from this. The legal notice, the cryptic warnings in the journals, The blood on the receipt, the past, was not just a story. It was a living, breathing entity, and it was coming for the Vance family to collect its debt. Julian's world was slowly, inexorably coming apart. The weight of his ancestor's secret was a venomous serpent coiling in his mind, its fangs sinking into every thought, every memory, and every shred of pride he had once felt for his family. Name. He could no longer sleep, eat, or find a moment of peace in his own home. The beautiful, elegant house he had designed was now a gilded cage, a monument to a century-old crime. Every picture, every piece of furniture, every carefully considered architectural detail seemed tainted. He saw himself as a silent accomplice to the sins of his father, his grandfather, and above all, Nathaniel Vance. The burden was suffocating. At first, Emily had attributed his distant behavior to work-related stress. But as the days bled into weeks, his silence, his haunted eyes, and the palpable fear radiating from him began to alarm her. One evening, she found him in his study, hunched over a stack of old papers. She sat beside him, placing a gentle hand on his arm. "Julian, what is it? You're hiding something from me," she said, her voice soft but filled with concern. His heart hammered against his ribs. He quickly gathered the papers, his movements frantic. "It's nothing, Em. Just a difficult project, that's all. I'm your wife, Julian." "I know when you're lying," she said, her tone firming. "Why don't you trust me? Is there a wall between us that I don't know about?" Julian met her gaze, but the words were trapped in his throat. He knew that if he told her the truth, her world would shatter as completely as his had. Their love, their trust, their entire life together would be exposed as a fraud. He chose silence, a choice that created a new, deeper wound between them. Emily looked at him, not seeing the man she loved, but a stranger whose eyes held only fear and helplessness. She left the room without another word, and from that night on, an invisible, impenetrable wall stood between them. The unraveling of Julian's professional life was swift and brutal. The legal notice mentioning Elias Thorne was just the beginning. Within a few short weeks, the Thorne family, represented by a formidable and seasoned lawyer, filed a formal lawsuit. They were seeking to reclaim the San Juan Island property and a substantial portion of the Vance family fortune, arguing it was founded on ill-gotten gains. Julian met with the Thorne's lawyer, an aging woman with eyes that seemed to have seen every lie in the book. "Mr. Vance," she said calmly, "we have new evidence. We recently uncovered pages from your great-great-great-grandfather's personal diary, in which he details his business relationship with Nathaniel Vance and his eventual betrayal." Julian knew she was not bluffing. He held Nathaniel's own confession in his study, and now the Thorne family had a corroborating account. The two diaries together would make Nathaniel's guilt undeniable. The lawyer then dropped a bombshell. "We also have documentation, including letters, that suggest the secret was not confined to your great-great-grandfather. It appears your grandfather and your father were both aware of the truth and actively participated in its concealment." Julian felt a fresh wave of nausea. The lawsuit wasn't just about money. It was a crusade for justice, a multi-generational quest for vengeance against the Vance name. The Thornes were not just looking for compensation. They were looking to expose a century of lies. Desperate, Julian began his own deeper dive into the past. He couldn't just accept the word of a rival lawyer. He needed to find out who was behind this. He started investigating the Thorne's attorney, trying to find any potential weakness. He also scoured his own office's archives, suspecting his father might have left behind clues, some final effort to protect the secret he had guarded so fiercely. It was during this time that Julian's colleague and friend, Daniel, noticed his increasingly erratic behavior. Daniel knew Julian was embroiled in a major lawsuit, but the fear and despair in his eyes were not what one would expect from a standard legal battle. Daniel tried to offer help, but Julian recoiled, refusing to confide in anyone. He was consumed by suspicion and a growing paranoia, trusting no one, not even his closest friend. Then, a small, inconspicuous article appeared in a local newspaper. It was a brief historical review of Vance and Associates, subtly mentioning Elias Thorne and his mysterious disappearance. The article didn't make direct accusations, but it planted a seed of doubt, hinting that the Vance family's rise to prominence might be linked to a dark secret. The article ignited a firestorm of whispers and speculation. The public trust in the Vance name, once ironclad, began to crumble. Clients started to distance themselves from the firm, their loyalty eroding with each new rumor. Julian's carefully constructed, perfect world was now falling apart for all to see. He realized that no matter how hard he tried to hide the truth, it was no longer his secret to keep. The past had broken free of its chains. Late one night, drowning in despair in his study, his eyes fell upon a photograph of his grandmother, Eleanor. Beneath the frame, a small, faded note was tucked away, a message he had never noticed before. The words were simple but profound. In truth, there is liberation. The note jolted Julian from his stupor. Eleanor hadn't just left behind a legacy of secrets. She had left behind a clue to his salvation. He realized that she didn't want him to bear this burden alone. She wanted him to end it. The next morning, he looked at himself in the mirror. He was no longer the same man. His eyes, though weary, now held a new resolve. He would not run from this. He would not choose silence like his father and grandfather before him. He would fight this battle, not just for his family, but for himself. He picked up Nathaniel's journal and, with a newfound determination, called his lawyer. He knew a new, terrifying chapter of his life had begun. The morning light filtering through the window of his study felt different, no longer illuminating a life of perfection but exposing the wreckage of a century-long lie. Julian had spent the night staring at his grandmother's note. In truth, there is liberation, and the spidery scrawl of Nathaniel's confession. He wasn't just going to fight the lawsuit. He was going to end the cycle of deceit that had haunted his family for generations. He picked up his phone, his hand steady, and called his lawyer. Robert Jenkins. Robert, it's Julian Vance. I need to meet with you immediately. There's something you need to see. Something that changes everything about this Thorn case, Robert. A family friend who had handled Vance and Associates' legal matters for decades was a picture of polished professionalism and cautious optimism. But as Julian laid out the journals, the forged receipt, and the damning evidence of a multi-generational cover-up, the color drained from his face. Julian, this is unthinkable, Robert stammered, his hands trembling as he handled the brittle pages. This isn't just a legal battle anymore. This is a public execution. If this gets out, the Vance name is finished. Your firm, your reputation, your entire life, it's all gone. The best legal strategy is to discredit the Thorn family's claim. To bury this evidence, not to use it against ourselves. Julian met his gaze, a new, steely resolve in his eyes. No, Robert, I won't bury it. My father and grandfather did that. And it's what has brought us to this point. I'm not going to perpetuate a lie. I'm going to tell the truth. And I'm going to do what's right. I want to settle the Thorn family's claim. I want to give them back what was stolen. And I want to tell the world what my family did. Robert looked at him as if he had lost his mind. Julian, that's not a legal strategy. That's a moral crusade. And it will ruin you. Then let it. Julian said, his voice quiet but firm. I'd rather be a ruined man with a clean conscience than a successful man living a lie. His next conversation was even harder. He found Emily in the kitchen, making breakfast for the children. The tension between them was a thick, palpable presence. He took a deep breath. We need to talk. I have to tell you something. He led her to the study and, with a heavy heart, laid out the entire sordid story. He showed her the journals, the forged documents, and the damning evidence of a crime committed a century ago that had echoed through every generation of his family. He watched as her face, once filled with concern, hardened into disbelief, then horror, and finally, a cold, crushing betrayal. You've known this? She asked, her voice a barely audible whisper. You've known this, and you've been living in this house, raising our children in this house, knowing it was all a lie. Everything, the firm, our life, the very foundation of our home. It's all built on a lie. The man I married, the man I thought I knew, was living in a monument to a murder. Julian tried to take her hand, but she recoiled. I'm so sorry, Em. I was scared. I didn't know how to tell you. Scared. Scared of what? Of losing your perfect life? Your perfect name? Julian, you didn't trust me. You chose the secret over me. Tears streamed down her face. Tears of anger and grief. I can't look at you. I can't look at this house. I need to go. I need to think. She packed a bag, her movements slow and deliberate, and took the children to her sister's. As he watched her car pull out of the driveway, his perfect family, his perfect life, disappeared with it. The silence in the house was deafening. A new kind of emptiness settling in. The fall had begun. The public revelation came with the force of a hurricane. Julian held a press conference, standing alone at a podium in the main lobby of Vance and Associates beneath the very portrait of Nathaniel Vance that had been a symbol of pride for a century. He read a prepared statement, his voice trembling at first, then growing stronger with each word. He confessed everything: the theft, the murder, and the multi-generational cover-up. He announced the immediate dissolution of Vance and Associates, and declared his intention to turn over all company assets to the Thorne family and a newly established foundation dedicated to historical justice. The backlash was immediate and brutal. The front pages of every newspaper screamed headlines like "Vance's legacy of lies and murder and deceit," the sordid truth behind Seattle's most prestigious family. The Vance name, once a symbol of integrity and success, became a byword for greed and corruption. His clients abandoned him, his colleagues turned their backs, and the friends he had once trusted vanished. The community that had revered him now looked at him with disgust and pity. His children faced the taunts of their peers, and he could do nothing but watch as they struggled to understand why their father had brought this upon them. The lawsuit was swiftly settled in favor of the Thorne family. He lost everything: the farm, the family home, the lake house, and his entire fortune. He moved into a small, rented apartment, a stark contrast to the sprawling architectural masterpiece he had once called home. The silence in his new life was different from the suffocating silence of his old one. This was a silence of emptiness, of loss. He was a pariah, a man without a name, a man who had chosen moral truth over everything else. One evening, as he sat alone in his new apartment, staring at the empty walls, the phone rang. It was Emily. Her voice was strained, but calmer. "Julian, the kids want to talk to you," she said. "They miss you." He spoke to Leo and Clara, their voices a balm to his shattered soul. They didn't fully understand what had happened, but they knew their father was hurting. They told him they loved him, and in that moment, he felt a flicker of hope, a tiny spark in the crushing darkness. He had lost his perfect life, but in its place he had a chance at something truer. A life built not on lies and inheritance, but on a foundation of his own making. The fall had been complete, but from the ruins, a path to redemption and a new kind of liberation was beginning to emerge. The silence of Julian's new apartment was not the crushing emptiness he had first feared. It was a clean, quiet space. The walls were bare, the furniture was simple, and there were no grand architectural drawings to remind him of a life built on a lie. He had lost everything: the sprawling lake house, the prestigious firm, the family name that had once opened every door, but in their place, he had found something he had never truly possessed: peace. The liberation his grandmother's note had promised was not a destination but a process, and he was finally, truly free. The phone calls with Emily and the children were the fragile threads that kept him connected to a future worth fighting for. Their first few conversations were difficult, filled with strained pauses and the unspoken grief of a family torn apart. Emily was still hurt, her betrayal too fresh to be easily forgiven. But she was not cold. She understood, on a deeper level, that Julian's actions, however painful, had been a desperate attempt to cleanse a legacy that had poisoned them all. She saw the new man he was becoming, not the distant, anxious figure who had haunted their home, but a humbled, more present father. He started meeting with Leo and Clara at a local park, a neutral ground far from the ghosts of his old life. He'd help Leo with his coding projects, his own mind refreshed by the challenge of a new kind of creation. He'd push Clara on the swings, her infectious laughter a balm to his shattered soul. He didn't try to win them back with lavish gifts, or promises of a restored life. He simply showed up, every single time, with an honest heart. He taught them that a name, a house, or a fortune were not what made a person, but their character and their actions. Finding a new purpose was a necessity. His old life as a partner at Vance and Associates was gone, a relic of a past he had consciously destroyed. But his passion for architecture remained, purified by his experience. He started a new, small practice from his apartment, calling it Julian Vance Designs. The name was a deliberate choice, no pretense, no historical legacy, just his name and his work. He began taking on pro bono projects, designing community centers, affordable housing, and shelters for the homeless. He used his skills not to build monuments to wealth, but to create spaces that truly served people, building a new kind of legacy, one brick at a time. His first major project was a collaboration with the Thorne family. He had met with Elias Thorne's great-grandson, a man named Michael, who had led the lawsuit. Michael was not a vindictive man, but a man driven by a profound sense of injustice. Julian had expected to find a bitter enemy, but instead found a partner in healing. They established the Thorne Vance Historical Justice Foundation, using the assets from the dissolved firm to fund community projects and promote historical transparency. The act was a symbol of reconciliation, a public acknowledgement that the wounds of the past could, with honesty and effort, begin to heal. One afternoon, months after the press conference and the lawsuit's conclusion, Julian received a package. It was from Emily. Inside, he found a small, framed photo of their family, a picture taken during a happy summer day at the lake house, a time that now felt like a lifetime ago. A short, handwritten note was tucked behind the frame. "We're not there yet, Julian," it read, "but we're trying. I'm proud of you." The words were a flood of warmth, a single moment of grace that meant more than any award or fortune he had ever possessed. As the sun set on his new life, Julian sat at his simple desk, a new blueprint spread out before him, the design for a community library. It was not a grand, sprawling design, but a thoughtful, beautiful building meant to serve a small town. He looked out his window, not at the pristine garden of his old home, but at the bustling, imperfect city below. He had lost his perfect life, but he was no longer a man running from ghosts. He was a man with a purpose, a man who had faced the darkness of his past and had chosen to walk into the light. The fall had led not to his destruction, but to his true liberation, and a new life built not on a secret, but on a foundation of hard-won truth.